Hi there, I'm Mary Soucy from Bead Me a Story, and this is the dimensional bead chain class. This class is going to go through, and in your instructions you have a full step-by-step tutorial showing you how to make this chain in a round format. In the video, I'm also going to show you how to make this in a flat version as well. The reason I gave you the instructions with the round is because I believe that if you go ahead and learn to make the round first, then you can jump into the flat with no problem. This all uses the same materials, so you can choose whichever one you'd like to do. But the flat one will be very easy to understand once you make the round version of this. This is an absolutely gorgeous chain. It's made with union seed beads, which are basically, these are Japanese made seed beads with check finishes added to them. They're very hard to find, so that's why I didn't want to include two separate kits for you to buy, because these are so difficult to find. I figured you could go ahead and get started. If you haven't learned this before, you can get started learning this and do some rows of round, and if you prefer the flat, then you can switch over to that. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so to start the dimensional bead chain, first I've got a paper clip sitting out here. You can also use a twisty tie. I've got chisel nose Xuron pliers and a 90-degree bent nose Xuron pliers. I prefer the Xuron pliers because they have a very non-slip surface. That said, you could also be using flat nose pliers in either of your hands with this. Let's get started. So first, I have pre-opened my jump rings so that we don't have to go through that part together. I'm going to pick up my first jump ring. I'm going to pick up a bead and hook it to the end of the paper clip and close the jump ring. Then I'm going to pick up a second jump ring, pick up a bead, pass it through the paper clip. The paper clip is just going to help hold our first row in place. And then when you put down your work, of course, you don't have to worry about which is the starting end and which is the end that you were working on. So, okay. So what I want to make sure of before I pass this next jump ring through the work is that I have a bead on one side. In this case, the jump ring that's farther away from me has the bead on the left. Jump ring that's closer to me has the bead on the right. And I'm going to pass through both of these jump rings. Another way of looking at this is when you pass through two jump rings, I'm actually passing through the eye that intersects between the two as they cross over each other. Okay, I'm going to pick that up. I'm going to pick up a bead and close this. Okay, and then I'm going to pick up another jump ring. I'm again passing through that eye that intersects between the two jump rings of the first row. And then I'm going to pick up my bead and close this jump ring. Okay, now at this point, we haven't worried too much yet about where the bead is sitting. Of course, I went over with you the fact that the one that was farther away from me in the first row had the bead on it, and the one that was closer to me. So then, of course, when you create a chain, you have a jump ring facing in this direction, so you see it's flat. But as you grow a chain, this next jump ring that we would then connect to this would be perpendicular to it. So just keep in mind that as we see these rows, we kind of need to turn it to the side to look at this next set of beads and where they're gonna sit. So I don't care where the bead is sitting as you're putting them on. But now that we're about to start our next row, we do care where that bead is gonna sit. So in this first row, the bead that was, the jump ring that was further from me has the bead on the left, closer to me, the bead on the right. So I'm gonna just turn this work ever so slightly to the right. So basically a quarter turn counterclockwise, okay? And then I can see that this would be the jump ring that's further away from me. And I want the bead on the left. And this is the jump ring that is closer to me. And I want the bead on the right. And this, as I put this jump ring through, this is when I care where these two beads are sitting from the previous row that I created. Okay, so I'm going to pass through. Pick up a bead, close this jump ring. Now again, just like in the last row, I want to make sure that I am passing through the eye that sits between the two jump rings from the previous row. Okay, so hopefully you can see that here. Passing through the eye, pick up another bead. This bead doesn't have a location yet because I am just adding a jump ring with a bead and adding a jump ring with a bead. Okay, so now this row is parallel to the first row. So now we want to look back at where were the beads sitting in the first row. So I want to move this jump ring's closer to me, beads on the right. This jump ring's further from me, beads on the left. Now when I add this next jump ring through to start the next row, this is going to lock that row I just created into place. So I'm going to pass through both of those jump rings, okay? And now, as you look down through it, you can see that we have 4 sides happening here. You can see that there's a bead here, bead here, bead there, okay? Okay, so this one that I'm working on, I'm going to pick up a bead. And then I'm going to pick up another jump ring. Pick up a bead. As I said, this row I'm working on, I'm just putting the beads on. And as I start the next row, once I get these 2 on and I begin the next row, that's when I care where these guys are sitting. Okay, so now I'm looking back down at row 2. Okay, so the bead is going to be on the jump ring that's further away from me. The bead on the right is the jump ring that's closer to me. Okay, and I will pass a new jump ring through here so that you can see that all of these beads are locked into place and that you're seeing a square as you look down from the top of it. Pick up a bead. Pass through, pick up a bead, and close. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and lock these in place. See, the one farther from me has the bead on the left, closer, bead on the right, and now I want to show you something. So in the direction that I have it turned, you see that I can see the sides. I can see this row of 2 jump rings, and there's 1 bead in this row. So each of these beads sits on the left. Okay, now I'm going to turn this clockwise a 1/4 turn. I'll grab it here so I can stretch it out. Okay, and this only has 2 rows. Okay, but if you look at the 2 jump rings, this bead is on the left, this bead is on the left. If I turn it another 1/4 turn, you can see there's 2 jump rings in each of these rows, here, here, and here, and the bead is always on the left. So once you get a few rows of this, this is what I want you to look at. As you pass this new jump ring through that I'm starting this new row with, I can easily pull on my paper clip, and you know, the beginning where the paper clip is, of course, these beads could easily accidentally slide to the wrong sides. So, you know, barring that being on the wrong side, mine is on the correct side. But barring that first row, you should be able to look down, and every single bead that you have should be sitting on the same side. Okay, so I'll just continue with one more. Bead. Close the jump ring. Pass another one through the work, through the eye. It was between the 2 jump rings of the last row. And close the jump ring. Okay, so these beads, these 2 jump rings just got put on. There's nothing for me to look at here yet, but as soon as I pick up this jump ring, I'm going to pass it through. I want to make sure that the jump ring that's away from me has the bead on the left, towards me, bead on the right. And as soon as I pass this through to start a new row, I can see that everything is laying properly. So you need to make sure, again, that the whole way up the chain, that all the beads are sitting on the left-hand side. So let's continue our work. Okay, so as you can see, I've been working along on my chain. It's getting longer and longer. I wanted to talk real briefly with you about whether to pick up a bead before or after you put it into the work. So my preference tends to be to pick up the jump ring and then go ahead and put it into the work and then pick up the bead. Okay, that's one way of doing it, and that's fine. The reason I prefer to do it this way is because I don't have to set down my work in between to pick up the next bead. I can do it in process. However, the nice part about picking up the bead first in this particular design is that once you pass through the 2 rings of the previous row, you can see that the bead is over on my right-hand side, and this has more surface area to grab. So that makes it a little bit easier if you're having trouble closing jump rings. But like I said, I don't prefer that because I have to put down my work in between. And you see I'm sliding my bead over to the left again. The other thing you can do is you can preload your beads and lay them, get them all ready before you start working. Now, this is nice and it works well. My only problem with this is that sometimes I do still have to put down my work because sometimes I can't grab it like I just did there. Sometimes the jump ring will sink into the work a little bit, and then I end up having to set everything down to adjust the bead and pick it up again. So that's completely up to you, but I just wanted to show you the different ways of doing it. When you first start the chain, when we were at the very beginning, it's definitely better that you use your jump rings first and then add the bead. But once you get past, say, row 3 or 4, you can go ahead and do this any way that you would prefer to do it. Now I want to show you how to do the dimensional bead chain in a flat version as opposed to a round version. So just as before, you see I have a paper clip and I've started the chain with 2 beads. So we're going to do this in the same way as we were doing it before. We're going to pass through between these 2 beads, pass through both jump rings, pick up a bead, and close the jump ring. Then grab a second jump ring, one of my beads flipped around, so I was having a hard time getting that through. Oops. Pick up a bead, and close. Okay, so now that I have 2 rows on this, you can see one of my beads in the paper clip slipped over to the other side. So I'm going to try and correct that. Okay, so once we're on row 2, this is when it matters which side the bead is sitting on. So you can see in my first row that the bead on the left is sitting on the jump ring that's farther away from me. And on the right, the bead is sitting on the jump ring that's closer to me. So this one, our jump rings are going to end up laying a little bit flat as opposed to, you know, turning on the perpendicular. So what I want to look at is if I look at the row above me, now I want the jump ring that's closer to me to have the bead on the left. In this row, this is the jump ring that's farther from me. Now this is the jump ring that's closer to me has the bead on the left, and vice versa. So let me pass another jump ring through. This is going to lock this row into place. Pick up my bead. Okay, so that's one. Remember, we're passing down through the 2 jump rings in the last row. Oops. Pick up my bead. And close. Okay, so now you can see on the left-hand side, this is the jump ring that's farther back. This is the jump ring that's closer to me. And then I want the 3rd row for it to be on the left if it's the jump ring that's farther back. And if you look at the right-hand side, this one's closer, this one's farther, this one's closer. Move my thumb just so you can see that. Okay, so we're alternating which side the bead is sitting on at this point. So remember, when I start my new row, this is when it's important that these guys are on the sides that you want them to be in. And I'm going to pass through. You can already see that this is coming out flat as opposed to round. So the rows aren't necessarily going in a perpendicular. They're kind of have a back and forth motion going on. Okay, put that bead on. Close. Pass through both of them, again passing through the eye of both of those rings, or just through both the rings, whichever way you want to look at it. Put the bead on and close. Okay, so I kind of focus just on the left side just to make it easier on myself, so I don't have to you know, intensely look at both sides. So This was the jump ring that was behind, the bead is on. This is the jump ring in front that the bead is on. This is behind. So this time I want the left side to be the jump ring that's in front or more towards me. Okay, pass through again. Close the jump ring. Okay, pass through. See how I'm going through again, both jump rings. Oops, need to pick up a bead. And close the jump ring. Okay, so now this time it's the jump ring that's farther away from me that is going to sit on the left side. So let me put a jump ring through here just so I can stretch this all out and let you see. So you can see here that this jump ring is further away from me, but the bead is sitting more towards me. In this one, the bead looks like it's back, but it's actually on the jump ring that's closer to me. And then it goes back and forth. So you see the beads look like they're going up and down when we do this, but you can see that this is laying fairly flat as compared to this one here. So when you look at this one from the side, if you remember, let me put it the other way, in the opposite direction. Okay, if you remember, any side you look at with this chain, the bead is on the left, the bead is on the left, the bead is on the left, okay? But this one would actually be the bead is on the left, the bead is on the right, the bead is on, it would alternate back and forth. Now, you end up seeing it as a flat formation, but that's because we alternated with each row which jump ring had the bead pushed to either the left or the right. So let me go on and I'll add a little bit more to this. Okay, so I've added several more rows to this, and I just want to show you another way to approach this. So as you can see, I'll show you this sideways. So you can see how the beads go up and down and up and down on either side, and that's because you're changing which bead is on the left and right in each individual row. Now, that takes a lot of concentration to try and figure out left, right. So there's actually a better way. And there's a reason why I show you the dimensional bead in the round version first. And that's because once you get a feel for that, that has a very wide quality to it. And you can feel in your hands the thickness of this. Whereas when you start doing this version, when you go to start the next row, you can actually feel when this is flat, when this feels flat in your hands. So you'll kind of just know instinctively, and that's quite all right to just go by the feel of it as opposed to looking at every row. And I think it'll be fairly obvious if suddenly a mistake occurs and something's sticking out, because all of a sudden you'll have something jutting out into this portion that, as you can see, is just all jump rings. So that should be fairly noticeable if it happens. And like I said, kind of use your instincts on this one and just feel how it feels in your left hand as you're holding it. And I think that you're going to be able to tell when you have a mishap and when it wasn't done right. Also, this one tightens up quite a bit, so it's going to be kind of difficult actually to have it in the wrong direction. So Once all your jump rings start leaning in the correct directions, so you can see how I just let that flatten out and these automatically kind of fell to the sides that they want to be on. So if you're on the wrong side, see how all of a sudden this is sticking out in the middle? So like I said, this one can be very much by feel. I showed you how to look at it and how to know if the bead is in the right place. But if you go ahead and do the round version of this first, and the one that's very dimensional, where you have every bead on the same side of the row, then when you go to do this one, it's going to feel very different in your hand, and I think you're going to know exactly what to do instinctively.